Welcome CSC 103 to exercise 9 out of unit 9. This is our test scores and it's our introduction to programming, and we're going to do some coding. And instead of using Trinket like we've used in the past, we're going to use repl.it. And hopefully you've already watched the video on setting up repl.it. I've done that. So what I'm going to do is open my file that I started. Now I'm in my home tab of coming into repl.it after logging in. I'm going to go to my repels, as I call them. And in the folder that I made, CSC 103, I'm going to open up my repel and I can just click on it. And I shouldn't have anything done yet. And there it is. Nothing's here. And I'm going to close up my files over here so I have a little more room to code. I don't need a whole lot of room here, but I might move this over so when I record it, you can see the output right here. Now I'm going to follow the handout. This is the PDF handout that's going to be posted under Documents and Resources Handouts, and it talks about doing the first part, signing up for repl.it and doing all that, which you should have done already. And then we're going to start coding. And the first thing we're going to do is nothing really exciting. We're just going to make some variables, and we're going to use the letters A, B, C, D, and E. Now these have nothing to do with test grades. The letters themselves are just letters because we're going to keep them as short as possible. And these letters are going to represent variables. So I have a couple numbers here. This person was getting progressively worse, 97, 93, 75, 81, 53. And I'm just going to do that, and I'm just going to assign these variables. And what we're going to do is declare and assign a variable. Just doing this, just saying A equals, and the first one I think was 97. That's declaring a variable, and it's assigning it to the value 97. And the second one is going to be B, and that's going to be assigned to 93. And the third one's going to be assigned to 75, and then 81 and 53. So hopefully I can remember those. So we kind of went down here. I think those are the numbers we used here. And those are 5 variables. Now we're going to run the code. It says run the code. Let's run it and see what happens. This is going to be exciting. Nothing happens because we don't have any output yet. We just have variables that are assigned. So there's nothing really to happen over here yet. If you wanted to, you could put a print statement. This is a print function. It's built into Python. And if you just use print and use parentheses, inside the parentheses, you could say what you want to print out. Now you could print out anything. You could print out the word hello. And if you put it in quotes, that would be the word hello. And if you ran it, it would say hello. Now, if you just had the word hello, if you just did that, already I have a red wavy line here. If I hover over it, it says undefined. And if I go to run it, I'm going to get an error because it's undefined, because when there's no quotes on a word, it thinks it's a variable. And the only variables we have are A, B, C, D, and E. So this is not a variable that we have assigned to anything, so it doesn't recognize it. So it says it's not defined. So if we want to print out a word, we have to put quotes on it and make it into what's called a string. Now if I want to print out just the letter A, there is a variable for A. That would match up to that. And if I print it, it would just print out 97. And if I wanted to add all these together, I could just put A plus B plus C plus D plus E. I could print these all together, and what should come out is whatever these add up to. I don't know what they add up to, but we'll see what they add up to. They add up to 399, and 7 and 3 and a 5 and a 1. But basically we're using a print function just to print out these variables. So we can add these variables together as long as they're numbers, as long as they're integers, or we could just print out 1. So that's how the print function works. Not too exciting. Now what we're also going to do is find out the average of these numbers. Now you know how to figure out an average. We'll add them all together and then we'll divide by 5. Now we could go in here and put like division by 5. Now that / is divide, and when we use multiply it's an asterisk, but that's divide. But what would happen here is we would run into problems because by order of operations it would want to divide that last one, 53, by 5 first, and then it would add the others to it, which wouldn't give us what we want to do. Then we'd have to put in like a parentheses around here to make sure that it added those first and then divide it by 5. But now we have double parentheses, so this is getting a little confusing. So what we're going to do is just get all this stuff out of here, and I'm just going to empty this out, or I could cut it. I could do Command X and cut it, and I'm just going to put another line here, and I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call it average. I'm going to say AVG equals, and I could paste. If I cut it, I could paste it, and if not, just retype it. And what I'll do here is I'll put the parentheses around here. So now it makes more sense because it's not inside of here. We have A plus B plus C plus D plus E in parentheses, so it adds them together first, 399, and then divides them by 5, and that should be our average. of these grades. And again, we're just kind of experimenting with numbers a little bit. Now, for something to print out here, if I would run this, nothing prints out because this is now empty. So the print statement is now empty. Now, if we want to print out average, we just have to put average in here. So we'll put average, and we'll see what happens. And it's saying 79.8, and that's fine. We actually want to keep it like that so that we have one decimal. And if we want to round it off, we could round it off. And if we want to round it up, we could round it up. Even if we did something like this, I could even reassign it. Now, I think on the sheet, I say to keep it to one decimal, but you could do something like this. This is called reassignment. We could just say average. So average already is these 5 values divided by 5, added together and divided by 5. And then I could say average equals, and then I could just say round average. Now, if I round average, it's just going to round it off, and it should make it 79. So if I run it, it should print out 79. Or I mean, it should print 80, I'm sorry. It'll actually round it up to the closer one. There's a way you can round it down and a way you can round it up, but it's going to round it, if it's 0.5 or above, it's going to round it up. So it rounded it up to 80 right there. And if we did something like this, if we put comma 1, that would round it to one place. Now that's what it was doing anyway. So now it's back up to 71.8. And if I put a 2 here, I don't think it'll put a 0 at the end. It won't put a 0 if it doesn't need one. So it's rounding it to one place. So I'm going to leave it to one place, even though it was doing that automatically. This is just a reassignment. We're just taking that variable, which ended up being 79.8, and we're just rounding it up. That way, if we change the numbers here, it'll still do that. Now, next on our list here, we just did all that. So we're moving quick. There's not a whole lot to do here. And there's the code for doing that. Average equals round average. So it's rounding itself. And again, if you took away the 1, if you took away that extra argument of the 1 here, and again, these are arguments in here. If you took away this second argument, you just did average, it would just basically round it to the nearest. And if it's 0.8, it'll round it up to 80. So however you do that, I'll put the 1 in here. And again, the spaces aren't a big deal in here. You don't have to put spaces. Now they do have a little button here called auto format, and if you do that, it'll put spaces in for you so that it looks a little nicer and things are spaced out a little bit. So if you want to use auto format, you could do that. It looks a little cleaner, a little easier to read. And I'll go back here. We're already on the next page. We haven't done a lot yet. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change the variable names, because with these tests here, it's kind of confusing that we have A, B, C, D. They're almost like test grades. So I'm just going to call them, instead of test 1, test 2, test 3, I think I did that in the past. I'm just going to call it T1, and I'm going to call this one T2, and this is T3. That way, if we have more of them, we don't just go up in letters. We could just kind of number them. And I'll call that T4. Now, the reason I'm putting a T in the front is because you can't have a variable start with a number. A variable has to start with a letter, but you could have a number in it, so we're putting it there. And also, a variable can't have a space, so you can't make a variable like that. Already, I'm getting a wavy line there. So that's why I'm making it T1, T2, T3, T4, and then T5. And that's just shortening it from test 1, test 2, because if we have to type that, that's a lot of work to do that, and there's more chance of screwing it up. Now, we have a wavy line down here because these are all undefined, and it's showing us undefined, every one, A, B, C, D, and E, because now they're no longer defined. These are the variable assignments, and it's looking for these variables, and it can't find them, so we have to change these. So this one I'm going to make T1, and I'll make this T2. So we'll just change these now so they're no longer undefined. But now they make some sense. And it shouldn't do anything different. If you run it, again, it's just doing the same thing. And just a reminder, you don't have to hit save. There's no auto save in here, so it'll save for you, so you don't have to worry about doing that. Now, all we did was just change the variable names and then just update the variable names here, because they always have to match up. So whenever you're using variables, they always have to match up to the original variable definition or the original declaration and assignment. Sometimes this is called initialization that we're doing here. The combination of declaring a variable and assigning it is initialization. So that's what we're doing here. So there's a lot of different terms that you'll see sometimes. But again, if you don't have them matched up, if you use a variable that you don't have, you're going to get an error. Now let's say we had another test here and I had to go and add another one. I'd have to make another variable, call it T6, and then I'd have to make it equal whatever the next test was. Let's say it's a 79, or let's do a 77 since the average is 79. Let's say that's the next test. Then I'd have to come down here and I'd have to add one more, and I'd have to add a plus here, and I'd have to do a T6, and then I'd also have to remember to change this number, and I'd have to do that. And the more variables I added here, then the more numbers I'd have to add here. And it would get very tedious trying to keep track of all these. It looks bad. There's a lot of things here to add together. It's very easy to screw up. I mean, it's working so far, I think, but if you just mess up one thing here and you forget to change this number, and you left this at 5 or something, you didn't update it, it's like, oh wow, I got a 95, and that's pretty good with those low grades in there, and that's because we have the wrong number here. So this can get a little tedious, and that's what I have in the sheet. This gets a little tedious. I don't think I tell you to make the extra ones there, but maybe I'll tell you to do that. But what we're going to do is do something that's a little easier than doing that, than just updating these things here, because this gets tedious. And what we're going to do is we're going to fork this right away. Even though there's not a lot of code here, I don't want you to delete any of your code yet, just in case you had some kind of error or anything like that. Let's go in here and we're going to fork this, and this will be just like duplicating it. And if you go on this thing on your repel here, what I'm going to do is just hit the fork button, and it'll just put a little 1 there. Now if you don't like that, if you want to put B or 2 or something, you could change it, but I'll just leave the 1 there for now. That's okay. So it made a copy. Now if I go back into my repels, and how would I do that? Well, if I go on here and I go to my repels, and I go into the folder, however you go to see them, you could see there's the original one, and then I just made this one now. And I could go back to that, so it's saved. It has all that code that was in it previously, and I'll close this up. And this would probably be a good place to take a break, so we'll pick up with this file in part 2.